Welcome to the Communication Diva podcast, episode 39. In this episode, the Communication Diva offers 9 tips on interviewing for podcasters. But before we get to that, I would like to offer 5 tips on what not to do if you're interviewing someone for a podcast. Tip number 5, don't forget to press the record button before you start your interview. Tip number 4, don't hum or mutter to yourself while your interviewee is responding to your question, no matter how bored you are. Tip number 3, don't mock or laugh at your interviewee during an interview. Wait until the interview is over, then mock them and edit it in before you publish it. Tip number 2, don't let your interviewee know the main reason you have finally condescended to interview them is that you were totally desperate for new material. And the number 1 tip for what not to do if you're interviewing someone for a podcast: don't forget to have extra batteries on hand for your recorder. As with any battery-powered device, running out of power before you're finished with it can be anticlimactic.
Welcome back to Communication Diva. This is Jen Swanson, and this is the podcast about improving your communication skills in order to improve your relationships. And if this is your first time listening or your 39th time, my hope is that there will be something here of value for you. Communication Diva is available in iTunes, Blackberry, Zune, and through Stitcher Radio, as well as on the website at www.communicationdiva.com. And if you go there, you will see on the right-hand side a Stitcher Smart Radio button, and you can press that button and download a free app for any of your mobile devices that will allow you to program your favorite podcasts and listen to them on the go. So that's a fun idea. If you haven't checked out Stitcher Radio, I suggest you do because it's lots of fun. The topic idea for today, 9 tips for better podcast interviews, came from a colleague and experienced interviewer, Andy Traub. And so I thank you for the great idea, Andy. You can check out all the amazing things that Andy is doing at www.takepermission.com, where he hosts and produces several different shows, and I believe that's a network. So he's got all sorts of offerings there that you can check out, and he's got his own podcasts and podcasts that he is doing for other people as well. So take a look at Andy Traub if you have some time. Well, Communication Diva began as a blog in September of 2011. And the podcast began in December of that same year. And so as you are listening to this, I have published 39 episodes and have interviewed a variety of people from all walks of life, all ages, and all levels of experience in different subject areas. I've learned a lot, and I still have lots more to learn, I'm sure, but I thought that I would share some of my tips with you thus far and encourage any added comments and tips from any of you podcasters out there, or broadcast journalists, or anybody who has any experience in radio or audio production, who would care to comment and add your expertise to this area. So what you want is a solid and fun and engaging conversation with your guest, and that's what I'm trying to help you get. And so in order to do that, I have a few ideas for you. And if anyone has any more ideas, please, again, feel free to come over and just click on the little comment section at the bottom, and you can log in as a guest, or if you're part of Live Fire, you can log in with your Live Fire name and enter your comment there. But anybody can, if you go there and click guest and log in. So let's get to the 9 tips. The first one is research first. It's a good idea to get familiar with your interviewee. So read their publications, find out what they like to do for fun, creep their Facebook page if you must. Do what you need to do to find out as much as you can about the person before you come to the interview. Have a preliminary conversation. Either you can do that in person or via email to build some rapport. and just get a little bit of information that maybe is outside the topic area of your interview. This will also help to relax the conversation and make it sound a little bit more natural. So research, make sure you check out the person that you're going to be interviewing, both so you don't get too many surprises and also so that you have an idea of what it is they are doing and what they are interested in. Number 2, have some questions ready. So ask the interviewee, and I like to do this, is to ask them to suggest 2 or 3 questions that he or she would like you to ask. So this way, topics and ideas that the guest would like to cover will not get missed. You can have a few questions of your own based on your previous research as well, but be willing to drop these if the conversation takes a different turn as it goes along. Sometimes you'll just naturally want to follow a train of thought that will take you to sometimes surprising and rich new places. And when that happens, you can abandon your particular questions, but you might also feel comfortable having them as a guideline. So I suggest asking the guest for a few questions that he or she would like to cover, and then you can also think up some of your own, and then allow the rest of them to just flow naturally. I don't believe in a completely structured interview process because it doesn't sound like a natural conversation. So that's number 2, have some questions ready. Number 3 is ask for a bio of the person in advance. So during your preliminary conversation, clear up any questions around perhaps how to pronounce the person's name or the name of their business. Ask them how they would like you to introduce them. For example, do they want to be called by a certain title, or do they want some of their credentials mentioned, or what exactly do they want your audience to know about their background? And at this time, you can ask for any contact information, and I like to ask for a photo to add to my show notes so that listeners, if they want to, can come to the website and check out what this person who's talking might look like. So I always ask my guests for a picture and also for how they want to be contacted if people want to know more. So what email or website information can I include? And sometimes I ask for, further information on their topic and maybe some recommendations that they might have. So asking for that information in advance can also help you in preparing, because you can look at that and learn a little bit from that as well. So that's number 3, ask for a bio. Number 4 is don't write a script. So unless you are really good at making a script sound natural, following it will be quite obvious and will sound stilted. And I also think that over-planning is going to prevent inspiration from taking over, and you might miss some valuable conversation. You want a podcast to sound quite natural, and you want it to sound as though you, the listener, is sitting in the room and is part of the conversation. That's what we want it to sound like. I said that wrong, didn't I? You want it to sound as though the listener, and if you're a podcaster listening to this, then it would be your audience, will be right there in the room with you as you speak. So you want to make it sound as if you're sitting there with your cup of coffee or your cup of tea, having a good chat. And that's the idea, that it's a good conversation that is not very stilted and more natural. So I prefer not to write a script. I know I've done it a couple of times and it just doesn't sound as natural as it would had I just let the conversation flow. So I prefer that method. Number 5 would be to stay in control. So if you're going to be interviewing a chatty Cathy, somebody who goes on and on and on and goes off on different directions, and you know this in advance, keep the microphone in your hand and don't be afraid to redirect the conversation to the relevant topic planned if necessary. Even if it means jumping in to interrupt, you want to keep it on track, and you also want to keep your eye on the time, because a 20-minute interview can easily turn into a 40 or 50-minute one, which is fine if you have a time, you have the time for it and the topic is interesting and fascinating and exciting. But if the person is beginning to ramble, then you might want to keep that in check. So stay in control, keep the microphone in your hand so that you are the one who can move it back to yourself if you have a question or if you want to move things on. And you also might want to have some hand signals developed in advance for when you want to wrap it up. And you could make that motion rather than saying something if you're face to face, and the person can then know that they've got a couple minutes left and they've got to wrap up whatever thought that they're on at the moment. And that can be a helpful thing as well, especially if your podcast happens to be something that has a time limit. Now, this podcast goes anywhere from, I think the shortest one was about 12 minutes to about 45 minutes. And it depends on the subject and the topic. And I seem to have been trying to keep things under half an hour of late, but it all depends. Some podcasts out there are 5 minutes and some of them are an hour. So completely up to up to you and what you're doing, but keep an eye on the clock because sometimes it's easy to get off track. And it's also easy to get off track if the conversation is a fabulous one. And if that happens, you might even decide that you want to, cut it into 2 different episodes and have part 1 and part 2 if the conversation goes on for a full hour and your podcast normally is half an hour. So you might consider that as well as an idea. Okay, so that's staying in control. That's number 5. Number 6 is to listen intently. Now, there's a lot to think about. You're thinking about your equipment, you're thinking about the time, you're thinking about maybe what to ask next. And those are all good things to think about. But if you suddenly find your mind wandering and you're looking at, how cool the interviewee's tie is, or thinking about what you're going to have for lunch or what you have to do next, you may just get busted. So, make sure that you are present in the room, both physically and mentally during the interview, and that you are actually listening to what the person is saying. Questions will naturally arise for you if you're really listening to the responses that your interviewee is giving. It's important to let the guest do most of the talking as well, because your audience presumably wants to hear what they have to say. So allow the guests to do most of the talking and interject as you need to redirect or to further the conversation by asking another really great question. But this would be a time when you have a featured guest to allow the guest to speak rather than for you to talk at length. If your interview is face-to-face, remember to listen beyond words, and I think I've done a whole episode on that, but deep listening. So watch the person's body language and their facial expressions in order to pick up on things that you might want to ask about. So extra excitement in a response, for example, might cause you to say something like, "I noticed you just got very animated when you were talking about blah, blah, blah. Can you please tell me what it is about that excites you?" For example. So pay attention not only to the words that they are speaking, but if you are face-to-face, pay attention to all the paralanguage and the body language and the facial expressions, because you might think up a great question that will lead off into a completely different area if that's something that you are able to do. Okay, so listen intently. Number 7, ask open-ended questions. So questions that only require a yes or no response, which are called closed-ended questions, are not going to generate further conversation, and they can lead to a really stilted flow, as well as they cause you to have to dream up, twice the number of questions. So try asking questions using words like how, when, what, or why, or saying things like, "Tell me about blah, blah, blah," or "I'm interested in your views on this particular topic," or "Would you share your experience with the listeners around blah, blah, blah." So open-ended questions that are going to allow the conversation to flow and will be more work for your guest, because after all, your guest is the one being featured. So they should be the one doing most of the work, I think. Right? All right. So number 8 is remember your audience. So your listeners are listening because they are presumably interested in a particular topic. And if you know what those topics are, and at the same time follow your own passions so that you remain engaged and interested, then I think things will go a bit better. Your listeners can tell if you're not interested in the topic that your guest speaker is discussing. You might be trying to hide that, but it will probably come across. And if it comes through, it's not going to be very fun to listen to. I know that if I'm excited about an interview, it will come across in my voice, and the kinds of questions that I will ask will reflect that. I also, at the back end of the website, when I'm looking at my stats, I also pay attention to what episodes get listened to the most and what episodes are not listened to much at all. And I try to go more with what the listeners respond to topic-wise and book interviews accordingly. So I know that there have been some that have had very low listenership or listener rating. And so I probably won't cover similar topics to those again, because it doesn't seem like people in my audience anyway, which seems to be growing all of the time. There's something like 66 countries involved. But some of the topics just don't seem to resonate. So I'm going to stay away from those topics, and I'm going to move more towards the topics that I see from the statistics are generating more interest. So remember to think about your audience there. And number 9 is to relax and have fun. So informal, fun, entertaining, and valuable can all be a challenge to package together into one interview, but ultimately it's going to be more engaging and more interesting to listen to if it's not too prescribed. Worrying about, being perfect is going to hamper your performance. You can edit later if you absolutely must, or you can allow yourself to just be who you are and be human and to make mistakes. And I find that most people will forgive you. And I've put an image in the show notes that is one of those wall sticker things that's up on my wall in my office at the church. And it says, "In a world where you can be anything, be yourself." And I love that because it's true. People are listening because of who you are and because they're interested in something you have to say, or they feel a connection with you. And so don't be too hard on yourself. Be you and be authentic and relax a little bit and have a good time. I have all sorts of times when I could have edited out things that happened or things that I have said. I say way too often, and I know that, and I laugh a lot, and I find that I really don't like listening to my own work. But you know what? So do most people in radio, TV, and film. They don't like to look at themselves. Famous Hollywood actors don't like to watch their own movies because we're all pretty critical of ourselves, I think. So I think if I worried too much about all of those details, I would suffer from the paralyzed by perfection expectation syndrome. And you probably wouldn't be listening to me right now. So I think that gradually over time, you'll become more professional and more experienced, and you'll find your groove. So the part about relaxing and having fun, if there's some horrible thing that happens while you're recording, certainly you can go back and edit. But I wouldn't keep all of that technical stuff from allowing you to start a podcast. If you are somebody who is brand new or thinking about doing a podcast, my recommendation is to just do it. Just jump in and do it. I was inspired way back last year in December by a young woman who I have since met, named Anna Sophia Reinhardt, and she was brave and she started with a 10-minute podcast, and she's been podcasting ever since. And I thought, wow, if she can do it, I can do it. And I started with my 10-minute first little podcast. And once it's out there, you know what? It's out there and people can listen to it. And people are still listening to it. Every month they go back to the beginning and start at episode 1. And so I believe that as long as I continue to try and do my best and be authentic and interview interesting people, that the audience will continue to grow. So you will find your groove and you will become more professional, and and over time, it will be fantastic. So there you have my 9 tips for podcast interviews. And I would like to encourage any podcasters or want to be podcasters out there to come over to CommunicationDiva.com and add to the conversation by leaving comments in the comment section. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Oops, you see, I just dropped something. I'm not going to edit that out either. Please feel free to contact me as well through the website. You can come to Facebook, or you can email me at jenn@communicationdiva.com. And let me know your thoughts, ask any questions. I really encourage you to try interviewing people. It's a great way to meet people. It's a fantastic excuse to go out for coffee. And I absolutely love it. So there you go. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, this is Jen Swanson. God bless.